My name's Robin Ewing, and I'm the co-director of the Create Centre, Creativity in Research, Engaging the Arts, Transforming Education, Health and Wellbeing. And my co-director is here too, Michael Anderson. We want to start tonight by acknowledging and paying respect to our First Nations Australians, who are the traditional custodians of our land. At the University of Sydney, it's the Eora, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation that we pay respect to, but lots of you will be meeting on lots of other countries. And if you like, you can acknowledge that country by putting that in the chat room. We want to also acknowledge that the land was never ceded. So it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And we also want to acknowledge that story and the arts are at the centre of Indigenous cultures all over the globe. And we have so much to learn from that holistic way of knowing, doing, being and becoming. So welcome everyone. We hope you're doing as well as you can in these really uncertain times. And we're encouraged by the wonderful presentation that we're going to hear tonight from Helen and Alice. And now I'll hand over to my co-director, Michael Anderson.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks everyone for joining us. We see many friends coming in to join us this evening. And why wouldn't they? What a fantastic opportunity it is to hear from two leaders in arts, education, and the whole cultural setup of the UK and beyond. Create actually was put together to start to bring these kinds of conversations to the fore. The real, as Robin said, Create is actually kind of charged with the idea and kind of driven by the idea that we shouldn't be sitting in silos. We should be bringing people from education, the arts, creativity together so that our community might be enriched, it might be healed in some places, and it might be spurred on to more exciting things. And in the session tonight, we've got two leaders in this field, I would say. We've got two people who have really all of their careers in lots of ways looked at how we might actually bring the arts, education, and other sectors together. I'll also mention that if you're interested in the work that Create's doing, please join Create, because we'd love to keep having these conversations. We're really interested in what membership tells us about what they'd like to hear. So please keep those suggestions coming. But also we've got quite a back catalogue of discussions just like these that we'd be really happy to share with you, and you get access to those through the e-news and through other kind of channels. But tonight, we're really pleased to be able to bring you this conversation with Professor Helen Nicholson, who is from Royal Holloway at the University of London, and Alice King-Farlow, who is the Director of Learning at the National Theatre. Now, a few things about Helen. I've known Helen for as long as some of you in the room have known Helen, probably a little longer than some of you. Helen is one of the most outstanding leaders in theatre and education and the arts. She has been someone who has brought new thinking forward, who has been provocative, who has been really thoughtful about this whole field. And paired with Alice, who is also doing the most amazing job in education at the National and has done for many, many years. I think bringing those two together feels like a kind of, like it should be a Marvel movie to me, you know, kind of two superheroes of education and the arts. So as you can see, Helen's doing her Hulk impression. Really excited to talk to them. Really interested to hear what they're going to say. And please, if you've got comments or questions, start to formulate them, throw them in the chat box, and we'll have a time of questions afterwards. But enough from me, over to Helen and Alice.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Robin. Just want to say kind of thank you so much for having us. It's been a real treat for us to collaborate both on this talk and on the work that we've been doing together over the last couple of years. It's lovely to see some old friends in the audience. Thanks very much for coming, and really good to see you, and we really appreciate it. What we're going to do is talk through a project that we've been working on together over the last 2 or 3 years, and really try and unpack some of the questions that raises about what happens when a university and a major theatre work together. What are the implications of that? What are the opportunities? How can we kind of think through what that offers for us as a partnership, but also I think as two sectors coming together with different but complementary interests. So we'll probably talk for about 40 minutes. We haven't actually timed it. But then we'll open it up and hope that we can have a discussion, and there are lots of experts in the room, so it would be really helpful to kind of share some of the thinking across continents and so on. So I think, Alice, we have done a PowerPoint, because you can't look at us for the entire time.
Just wanted to add, it's lovely to be here, and very nice to meet you all over Zoom. It's been lovely having this moment to kind of reflect with Helen about our working partnership over the past few years, because it has been extraordinary, and it's been extraordinarily important, not just I think in the work that we've done together on public acts, but also a sort of continuing relationship, particularly over this past year with COVID and the sort of dealing with what was going on in universities and what was going on in theatres, and being able to link up through that. So yes, I will share this. I will attempt to share the slides. Is that now showing?
Not yet. Yes, coming up. There we go. So these were the 4 questions that we sort of that drive the talk, really. So why do theatres want to work in partnership with the university? So what's in it for theatres, in a sense? And I think and then I'll talk a little bit about the changing research culture. So why is it that we're coming together? What we've learned about being in partnership. And I think the last one is sort of really a provocation to open up questions. So the last slide is kind of not fixed. It's really just a way of thinking through. Alice, did you want to say a little bit about how you're seeing those questions?
Yes. I think we've been on a sort of interesting journey with thinking about research at the National Theatre, and it's become something. It's become more important to us over the past few years. Of course, we've always commissioned evaluation, and we've done evaluation ourselves. And Michael did some brilliant work with us on Warhorse when that production was touring in Australia. But with public acts, it was a very, very big new, and we'll come on to talk about it in a moment, but it was a very, very big new departure for the National Theatre, a kind of a major new project, which was not just a sort of one-off, that we wanted to be something which would continue. Rufus Norris, our director, talks about it as something that he wanted to kind of in his tenure in the National Theatre, he wanted to embed this new way of working in partnership with community organisations and making work with communities. That he wanted it to become absolutely embedded in the kind of fabric of the National Theatre, so that by the time he left, it would be sort of as much a part of our organisation as the auditorium, the Olivier Theatre. And so in starting to approach that, we felt that we needed to both be able to understand how the project was developing, and we have the imperatives of funders and the need to report on our activity, but also to be able to question more deeply how it was changing us as an organisation, what we were learning from it, whether the principles of mutual learning that we were sort of setting out in the partnership were, actually what that effect was. And I suppose it was a sort of broader question, which Helen and I talked about right from the start, which was really, what happens in the room. And the interesting thing about a research approach as opposed to an evaluation approach is the way that it can be very open-ended. It can ask that question of what happens. I suppose sort of just taking a step back from that, I think where it's taken me over the past, I mean, it's interesting thinking about research in the context of the broader national theatre. There are lots of different aspects of activity which we might term research. So, for example, we have a very active research culture at the National Theatre Archive. Our head of archive is doing a part-time PhD on the process of archiving theatre, and we have various sort of collaborative doctoral awards linked to the archive. And one of the things Helen and I talk about is the fact that theatres, as opposed to, say, museums, have less of a sort of, in the UK anyway, have less of an embedded research culture or a formal research culture. And we're starting to, one of the things we've been starting to discuss more recently is how, whether that's something which should change. But I realise I'm going very broad, Helen, and perhaps we should come back
to
talk about the project. But those are some of the things which we want to unpack in this conversation.
I think it's really helpful, Alice, because I think one of the things that struck me, and I should first say that it's been absolute joy to work with Alice in particular, but also the National Theatre on this project. And I think that sort of sense of really valuing the work that Alice is doing in the theatre has really helped the partnership develop, but also the changing research cultures in universities. Universities are really encouraged to work much more deeply and collaboratively with the sectors that they are aligned to, and I think that although that's been sort of very obviously the case in education, I don't think it's been the case quite so widely in other disciplines. And to really try and understand what's going on in the theatre sector has been really illuminating. Embedding those relationships at a very deep level, I think, is absolutely how the changing research culture is working in universities. So rather than doing a load of research and then kind of saying, hello world, would you like the benefits of my wisdom, it's about saying, well, what's helpful to you? What can my research enable? What can our research enable you to do? And perhaps how can we challenge each other in particular ways? And I think that sort of sense of mutual challenge is what lies at the kind of root of partnership. So I think it will be helpful now. Probably we're taking Public Acts as a case study because this is the project that Alice and I have collaborated on most deeply and obviously, but also it provides a context, I think, for thinking about some of these bigger questions.
So Public Acts is it's a new program which we launched in early 2017, although we were planning for it for at least 2 years before that. And it was inspired by sort of Rufus Norris's tenure as director of the National Theatre began in 2015, and it was really one of the earliest things he wanted to bring to the National was a focus on work with communities. It's led by an absolutely brilliant young director called Emily Lim, who you'll hear speaking we're going to show you a short YouTube film in a moment. So Helen came to work with us on the first phase of that program. I should also add it's as a program, it's inspired by Emily's work, by Rufus's initiative. There's an extraordinary history of participatory work and really excellent in-depth work with communities and partnerships between communities and theatres across the UK. And in some ways, the National Theatre was quite late to that party. So it was very, very heavily inspired by the work we knew from our colleagues around the UK, but also specifically by a program in New York run by the Public Theatre called Public Works, and some of the models and methodology that we've developed as part of Public Acts have been very much inspired by Public Works. And also, interestingly, Public Works has an embedded researcher, the amazing Shirley Bryce-Heath, who we talked to quite a lot in the early stages of developing our program. So Public Acts launched with 8 community partners across London. Selected, we met about 60, I think, and then whittled it down to 8 organisations doing extraordinary work. With in one organisation working with people with the experience of homelessness, another organisation working body and soul, working with people who'd experienced childhood trauma. We also had a theatre partner in the Queen's Theatre Hornchurch. So the first phase of Public Acts was a series of a workshop programme developed with the community partners in their settings, which then led into the rehearsal and production of Pericles, which was on the Olivier stage in summer 2018, a production, I mean, you'll see images of it in a moment, with just over 200 participants in it, 6 of whom were professional actors. And then subsequently, we did a production of As You Like It, working with the same 8 community partners and another partner organisation at the Queen's Theatre Hornchurch, which is in sort of the very edges of East London over into Essex. And then we were working towards a production in Doncaster, which is a former mining and industrial town in South Yorkshire, so in the north of England. And that work was happening in early 2020, and of course was interrupted by the pandemic. But we have continued to work with the communities in Doncaster, and we can share some links at the end of this talk. But we've actually been working digitally with communities in both London and in Doncaster, and including making a short film with The Guardian, which was entirely done on Zoom, which we launched at Christmas. But I think we should, Thomas, if you could possibly just cue the YouTube. This is a short film which says something about Public Acts and shows you something of the work.
Public Acts is a very exciting new project at the National Theatre, which is all about creating extraordinary acts of theatre and community.
If our mantra is this theatre is for everyone, it's about everyone being able to come to the theatre, but it's also about everyone being able to participate in theatre, telling stories, working as a community.
The project began with a series of bespoke workshop programmes that were all designed in collaboration with our community partners. Everyone who had taken part in our regular workshops was invited to come and be part of the company of Pericles, which was our first Public Acts production. This voyage of one man's understanding of what home means and what it is to belong somewhere and to feel connected to people couldn't have felt more resonant with all of us and with our company members.
There's been so much genuine love and support.
It's been great, you know, it's the best thing I've ever done.
My holidays can wait.
The experience I had with these guys here, nothing better.
It felt like there were literally hundreds of people who felt like this was their organisation, this is their space, this is for them, this is a community centre.
A huge part of that is about making one another feel good and about laughing together and sharing food together and dancing together in a way that feels united and honest.
I never liked theatre, but with this, they've really proven to me that there is something inside of me.
I'm taking away the people that I've met when we were warming up and when we were talking at the margins of lunch times and break times, and it's hard, it's so many things and everything.
The best thing about Pericles is that it isn't the end, it's actually the beginning. It's the beginning of our second year. We're so thrilled that we will be doing another show led by Doug Rintle, the artistic director of Queen's Theatre Hornchurch at the Queen's. And beyond that, we hope that Public Acts as an idea, as a movement, as a programme can roll out nationally. It should feel different everywhere it goes, but we hope that the National can have a long-lasting relationship with the idea of civically engaged theatre and be a force of connectivity between different theatres and community organisations and individuals across the country.
Thanks, Thomas. Helen, I think it's back to you now, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. I think what this was billed as a kind of slight pause in the PowerPoint for us to kind of just have a little conversation about what it meant for both of us to be working together on that particular project. And I think for me, the attraction was partly because I'd never worked with the National Theatre before, and when you get the call from the National, then you think, oh yes, that sounds very, I'd like to do that, thank you very much. But also it gave me the opportunity to really see and unpick some of the thinking that was going on within the project, and work together with everybody to kind of help shape it. I think one of the things that was really interesting at the beginning is I said to colleagues at the National, what is it that you want to get from this? And nobody was quite sure, which was, you know, kind of actually a real gift in many ways, because what I wasn't being told was to sort of measure particular outcomes, which I think is often the kind of focus of evaluation. That didn't somehow feel right, partly because this was in itself a practical experiment. It was kind of a piece of research in itself, and to see it in those terms and have it sort of set up in those parameters gave me lots of scope for kind of thinking things through in terms of all the kind of the discourses, I suppose, at play in that video, which were around things like connectivity, around questions of home, about belonging, about where we are now, about bringing people together, you know, all those things which seem to me to be really important, that the National Theatre is really interrogating. That gives it a very particular resonance. But also I was interested in that, in what it meant to work in partnership per se. So I've been around for quite a while in this sector, and one of the things that I find slightly annoying is the kind of flash and dash mentality, the idea that a theatre can rock up in a marginalised community, do an amazing piece of work, and then kind of disappear off. And this project seemed, and one of the things that really appealed to me about this project was that that partnership at all levels was really deeply embedded. So it wasn't making huge claims about the individuals who participated. It was talking about how partnership worked with the partner organisations that the National was working with. And that seemed to me to be actually kind of a really important thing to start to investigate. So in a sense, the research kind of was about the nature of partnership, about partnership with the theatres, with the other theatre, with the different organisations who were already working with people on a long-term basis. And that meant that the claims that the National could make, or that I could make in the research for the theatre, was really about the role of theatre. What is it that's particular about the role of theatre in this space that is not generalised? Organisation like Body and Soul, which is a wonderful organisation that work with people who've experienced childhood trauma, you know, what was it adding to their programmes? What you know, the National Theatre can't go in and cure their experience of childhood trauma, but what is this programme really adding, and what is the theatre doing? And I remember having a wonderful conversation with the director of Body and Soul, and one of the things she said was that trauma is embodied, and actually feeling joy is something that quite often gets blocked if you've experienced long-term trauma. So the joyfulness of public acts and the way in which it was conducted as a kind of, you know, great, joyful, wonderful sharing experience actually didn't need to be saying, well, I tell you what, let's talk about your trauma. It actually just needed to open up spaces of joy. So what is it that theatre can offer that is embodied and joyful and about movement and dancing and singing in all its various capacities? So that was the kind of bit that really intrigued me about it. I think, and it'd be interesting to see what Alice has got to say about this, but we kind of talked about change quite a bit in the process, because we're sort of aware that something needed to be changed, but not quite sure what. I don't know how that resonates for you, Alice.
I'm just going to go back a bit and say, I mean, we knew we wanted a researcher and an embedded researcher in the process, and we were so incredibly lucky that Helen was intrigued by the project. We had an early conversation in my office where Helen was very clear about what she would and wouldn't do, and what she was and wasn't interested in, you know, redemptive stories not being what she was interested in. I think, I mean, the huge value to us of working with Helen and her team, with the kind of body of knowledge that you drew on, Helen, because you know, you've worked in this field for so many years. This is an aside, there was various wonderful moments at the National where lots of people said, "Oh, Helen Nicholson, I've read her books. I read her books at university. I went to her lectures." So there was quite a lot of excitement from some of our colleagues here. But Helen, to your point about joy, Helen, it also, one of the other things we talked about a lot was the need not to kind of impose a sort of bureaucratic or a form filling or a process which would in some way take away from the experience. What we wanted was for the participants in Public Acts to come together as a company and to experience the process of rehearsals and showmaking, and you know, sharing of food and sharing of experience and all the things we did, and not to then be taken off into a corner with a researcher with a kind of a clipboard and a and so the way we worked it was, I mean, was to have Helen and her team in. We had one of Helen's team was attached to each to 3 or 4 of the community partners, and going into the work, so that relationships were built in the room. And I think what that then allowed was for some really extraordinary conversations, because they were based on the research team essentially being kind of part of the company and part of that cohort. And you know, the notes were written outside the rehearsal room, weren't they, Helen? And to your question about change, I mean, it is complicated, I think. I suppose we you know, from our own point of view as a theatre, we're interested in organisational change, and I think there are changes that have happened to the National Theatre, as in a sense, the launch of Public Acts signalled a desire to change and a desire to become a different sort of organisation and to work in different ways. And I think it has also changed us institutionally. I mean, it's interesting that we are now talking about our sort of post-pandemic. We're now talking about our work as an organisation with sort of 4 pillars, we're calling them, one of which is community, and the other 3 are young people, audiences, and theatre makers. And so there's a real sense that this work has moved to the centre of the organisation. And the research has been a really important part of that, and it's partly the reports, but in a sense the report is only part of it, because actually a lot of the real benefit of the partnership we've had with Helen is the conversations, and as well as the conversations that Helen and her team were having in and around the rehearsal room with the community participants, also the conversations that she's been able to have with us. It's sort of, it feels like it's an ongoing dialogue. Change, just going back to change, I mean, you know, change is complicated, and we need to, you know, we always need to know that change happens for so many different reasons, and that the theatre and the process of making theatre can only ever be part of that. But yeah, Helen, I'm going to hand back to you at this point, I think.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think it might be just useful to kind of have a look at the slides, just to keep us keep my head focused, I think, probably.
Thank you.
I think that sense of what what change means, and I felt very strongly at the National that there was a sort of movement towards change that was actually really important. But what I didn't want to do, and the conversation Alice alluded to, is I was very chuffed to be asked to do this, to be honest. And but I thought, well, if they want me to kind of write a load of redemption narratives about how the National Theatre turned up and talked to marginalised groups, and then suddenly everybody was better, then you're looking at the wrong person here. So I wanted to make absolutely clear that I was interested in being part of the process, but not just sort of measuring individuals or anything like that. And as Alice said, it felt, because people were being kind of supported by their partner organisations in so many complex and deep ways, it felt wrong for us as a team to sort of take them off and give them any kind of psychological tests or anything like that. So, you know, from a disciplinary perspective, this was it was me and other theatre, applied theatre education academics. We had an option at one stage of bringing in the psychologist from my university, and we decided against it. for very obvious reasons, that actually a lot of these people were already receiving quite a lot of support in that area, and that was not the role of this particular piece of research. Could you just flip to the next slide, Alice, please? So I think one of the things that's really interesting is what we bring as academics to any project. And I think this is the difference often between research and evaluation, is that I really brought with me this kind of understanding, I think, of the historical roots of the arts in cultural organisations. And I think this was something that really, it's an interesting set of conversations that Alice and I had between us about what it means to kind of really challenge what is a really, really deep-seated and embedded understanding of the social role of the arts, is in a sense kind of often regarded in all kinds of multiple ways, but the language in the end comes down to something that is a bit redemptive. So people, you know, there's a kind of root to it. 19th century sought to be civilizing, 20th century people talk about humanizing, and often there was a sort of quite a simple cause and effect narrative. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think you know, there were sometimes the funding streams seem to require a sense of this is what the project set out to achieve, and this is what it achieved. This is how people benefited from it. And of course, that's a really important part of what happens. But I think there's also something which is much deeper, much more relational, and much more embodied. And to really kind of question I put in the 21st century bit, that how change happens through structures and partnerships, and how that is kind of deeply rooted in organizational structures, as well as if you like, the kind of the ways in which individuals who take part in the project give themselves license to change as a consequence. I think the next slide is particularly interesting, and Alice, you might want to talk a little bit about this. Is Ben Power's email, actually, which he very kindly allowed us to use in the report that followed the project. I'll just read it, and Alice might like to comment on it because it's quite long. One reason it felt so particularly overwhelming, that's the Pericles production, is that it communicated in a single project and at points within a single moment of stage time everything that the National Theatre in 2018 wants to be. It was completely clear and totally legible to everyone who saw it what we stand for, who we are, and what we believe in. The National has to be from now on explicitly and defiantly the organisation that made Pericles. It should not be, that should be its legacy. The core beliefs that flowed through every second of that show should be the manifesto against which every decision is checked. Pericles is the business plan, the Arts Council's mission, the cover of the brochure. It's what the National Theatre is and has to be, and now we know it can be. Now, obviously, that's a kind of, you know, I think it was probably written on the night of the performance, which is an intense and emotional experience, but I was really struck by that as a researcher, how that kind of, that emotional heft, the emotional power of theatre enabled that level of articulacy around what organisational change means. And I think quite often organisational change sort of seems to happen in sort of columns and mission statements and so on, but I think it's also has to be an emotional impact. And I was really interested in the affective qualities of it, as well as the you know, if you like, the kind of more linear aspects. But Alice, that's more your territory, I think, than mine.
Yeah, Ben Power, who is still works with us, but was then the deputy artistic director of the National Theatre in full flow immediately after the show. I mean, but I think there's a lot of truth to what he's saying. I mean, Rufus, I think, is on record as saying that he thinks that Pericles is the most important production that's happened on the National Theatre stages in many years. It's sort of, I suppose what it did was it showed to the building the role that theatre could play, and the role that we could play as a national theatre. It's sort of, and the desire for more of that work to happen, for public acts to come back into the theatre. I mean, one immediate thing that happened is we had we had started out thinking it was most important as a National Theatre that public acts happened outside the building. And then we took the view that actually the first public acts production should happen at the National Theatre. And then having done Pericles, we realised that, well, it was really important that it did happen outside the National Theatre, and that we did make public acts productions with theatres like the Queen's Theatre Hornchurch and Cast in Doncaster, where a public acts production of the Caucasian Chalk Circle, although renamed the Doncastrian Chalk Circle, will happen next summer. It was also really important that it does come back to the National Theatre. The next slide, this just shows the this National Theatre Together, this sort of way of describing our mission and our role, and this is also a campaign it's a fundraising campaign as well, because obviously, like every cultural organisation, we've taken a massive financial hit in the past 18 months, and we're not yet financially stable. But what is, and sometimes it's sort of hard also to look back on this now with the experience of the past 18 months, because I think that has further deepened the changes that were begun with Pericles, in that in the, you know, hopefully we will eventually get to a point where we're dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic rather than dealing with the reality of it. But the way that it's affected communities, the way it's affected young people, the way that it's deepened disadvantage in places across the country, it feels that the role of arts organisations and what we can bring to, you know, to be part of, to contribute to support the kind of people coming back together again, the reconnecting of communities, you know, the creativity as a means and a stimulus and as a support to recovery, that feels like the most essential thing we should be doing as the National Theatre. And so public acts will be one of the really major, it will be a really major part of what we do over the next few years, alongside the other work that we do in communities around the country and with young people. Helen, does that answer that?
It really does. Yeah, thank you. And this is sort of relatively new to me, just everybody, because I think, you know, this is something that the National have been working on very recently, and it feels very organic to me, but also I feel quite emotional about it. I've been going to the National since it opened when I was an undergraduate in 1970 something rather, 78, 7. Anyway, it was a long time ago. And I saw the first production, and I've been going ever since. And one of the things that really struck me about Pericles, and I felt very emotional about it, was coming out, standing by stage door, and there were 4 women wearing hijabs coming out, having just performed on the National Theatre. Now, that shouldn't be something that's unusual, but it felt like a real kind of symbol of change. And I think what was really interesting was not just that the theatre was articulating this bigger picture, but also the participants. So this was one participant who talked about, you know, it's amazing to feel so connected in such a big, busy city against the backdrop of a disconnected world. It's defined. It's saying, no, this is actually the world we see, and this is a taste of what it can be. And I thought that what was really interesting about that was how the participants were also seeing a bigger picture. They weren't just thinking about it in terms of their own experience, and although obviously that was very powerful, but actually part of their own experience was about this sense of connectivity with a bigger picture and with something else. And I felt that that in a sense this was all emotionally driven, and that didn't seem to me to be a problem. And I think that that's something that we sort of, certainly in the research world, we try to acknowledge within our own writing, that we can write in a way that I feel, give myself license to write in a way that captures some of the kind of emotional of the moment, doesn't sort of distill it into a series of rather dry findings and outputs, but actually captures some of this. And I think that relates, if you like, to the kind of way in which we worked. And I think there might be another slide on that. Yeah, so, you know, this is what Alice mentioned it already, but we all joined in as researchers. It felt really important that we learnt the songs and we joined in the dancing, and that we were able to kind of generate that kind of warmth that enabled people to ask, to talk to us in ways that felt in terms of disclosing, that was what we're after, but felt that it was something that we were all part of and we're all embedded. So yeah, the postdoctoral researchers and the PhD students were really valuable in this, because they really did get down and join in and take part. We were singing and dancing researchers. That's what we did. And I think the other thing was getting that shared vision and communicating with a clear understanding. And I think that was kind of really central to this, was actually a shared set of beliefs that we kept checking in with each other about. I kept checking in with Alice and with Emily Lim too. You know, are we giving you what you need? Are we kind of talking in the right way? You know, how do we engage with? Alice used to kind of say, this is Helen Nicholson, she's our researcher, she's lost all sense of objectivity about this research. And actually I loved that, because I think it was actually really important to kind of, you know, question some of those boundaries between subjectivity, emotional objectivity, and so on in this process. I think just the last slide is more of a sort of a kind of set of questions, really, which I hope will stimulate debate. I think something about the value of a shared vision. I love the National Theatre. I've been going there for a long time. I'm committed to community and what that means. But I think there was something about actually really kind of thinking, well, what is the shared vision? That doesn't mean to say that I didn't have some challenging questions to ask. And this might be something that emerges more in the conversation. And I needed to learn, one of the things I really learned was kind of finding ways to share findings or to ask challenging questions in a way in which they could be understood and enjoyed in multiple contexts. So particularly Pericles, which was the first big public acts phase, it really wasn't helpful for me to be going up to the director at the end of a busy rehearsal where she was holding an awful lot and saying, well, you know what I've just observed about this, that and the other, can you just say a little bit more about that? It just wasn't helpful. So and at times, if you like, I felt, oh, is anybody actually going to listen to what I've got to say? But it was at the end, when everybody had time to reflect, that we had some really, really important conversations with people who've been actively involved. So that for me was really, really helpful to kind of think, well, when is it this an appropriate time to ask these questions? And I think understanding the project from different perspectives, I was very fortunate with Alice in every way, but particularly fortunate with Alice in that she understood what were the institutional demands on my work, that we are expected to account for our the impact of our research in all kinds of slightly bizarre but complicated ways. I didn't need this to be instrumentally. I don't like that kind of instrumentalization of research, but I did need to feel that it wasn't just a report that would sit on a dusty shelf and then kind of cherry picked for funders. I needed to feel institutionally that there was something really valuable about that. And then I suppose the last thing, and I'm sure we'll want to come back with some thoughts of our own, but was a kind of little provocation. I don't know whether we can shape the future of the arts, but I'm damn sure that post-pandemic, if we ever get to a post-pandemic, I will have a much better understanding of the difficulties and the challenges that the theatre sector have faced as a result of this collaboration and this partnership. And I hope that the same is true for Alice. And I think it's only by really trying to understand things from different perspectives that we can actually move forward. And we ought to be able to support each other in really complicated and deep ways. That's all I've got to say on that, Alice. I don't know what.
And just before we open up to questions, I mean, just a quick note on Helen's report is and has been and will continue to be really important for us in terms just in that really practical need of fundraising. So it kind of as well as everything that we've talked about, it also did that really important so I suppose functional need of research of evidencing impact. And one of the things that we're now working on institutionally is thinking about how we take that kind of discipline and that approach to the rest of our work with communities and with young people. And we're now starting to explore theory of change models as a way of kind of articulating the kind of broad goal and the broad narrative of our work with young people and with communities. But to come back to the point about shaping the future of the arts, I mean, I think one of the things I feel is the sort of, you know, we're in a complicated climate for the arts at the moment, politically and in the UK, and there's a sort of sense of universities and arts organisations as you know, part of our role, our shared role is to, you know, to ask some of the big questions and about society and who we are, and to share those and to find ways to share those stories more widely. And so and we join up in so many different ways. And what's really come out of this partnership is thinking that there are more and deeper ways that universities and arts organisations can join up through this sort of you know, a shared need and a shared interest in research. And it's exciting to think about what we can jointly do with that over the next few years as we hopefully move out of this acute phase of the pandemic. So I think that's it from our presentation. It would be lovely to hear if there are any questions.
That'd be great. Could we stop screen sharing so that we can? Will be really great. Thank you.
Fabulous. One of the things that occurs to me about this relationship, which is so fantastic, is that point you made about how it started to permeate the policy of the organisation. And when and anyone who's worked in arts education and education in theatres knows that it's often not the tail that wags the dog. It's actually sometimes forgotten. And I think there's something really inspiring about how you've worked together to make a difference in that space, and that the education programs are actually permeating the rest of national, which I think is probably not unprecedented, but is unusual, I would say. And I think that's a marvelous thing to kind of really have happen. If anyone's got questions, please drop them in the text box, and then I'll invite you to ask them potentially. Ruth, do you want to ask your question? Unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, apologies, no video. My interwebs are always pretty poor, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me okay. But yeah, I'm just curious about what, you know, how you went about evaluating the impact of the research, given that you weren't doing, say, formal interviews per se. I'm a PhD student. I'm running a participatory theatre workshops with refugee background women, which have all been delayed because of COVID, but hopefully will be coming up in the next few months. And my plan, like you, is actually to be embedded in the room. So it's looking at acting classes rather than rehearsals. And I mean, I am planning to do conversational style interviews with the women participating. But I'm just curious about, you know, how you know, what you actually use for evaluation, and whether you looked at methods outside of, I suppose, Western methodologies, whether you were able to bring more of a decolonised approach, I suppose, into the research.
Shall I kick off with that one? I think methodology was kind of really interesting, because it seemed to me when we started that either we could sort of take an evaluation methodology, or we could kind of do a bit of deep hanging out, really. And we chose an ethnographic approach, which didn't preclude some formal interviews. And I certainly went around interviewing the heads of all the partner organisations as formal sit-down recorded interviews. But I think in the room, it really was, we were kind of influenced by people like Sarah Pink, who talks about sensory ethnography. We really tried to kind of talk to people about what we were doing, so they really understood what our role was. And actually it was interesting. I had a colleague from Manchester University, Jenny Hughes, who popped down to see a rehearsal, and lots of people just came up and started talking to me, and she said, oh my goodness, they really know what your role is, don't they? They know what your job is. And I think that was the key to it, is people understood that I was sort of with them, and the team, it wasn't just me, there were three of us, that we were really with them, that we really were kind of willing on this production, but and their work, but also that we were kind of reflecting it back. So we just kept reinforcing what we were there for, and then people came to us. Sometimes I was taken aside when people wanted a rant. You know, it's all going wrong, and I don't understand why I'm here, and what am I, you know, there was some of that. And there was also, you know, some of the kind of the other kind of rant, which was people saying, this is the most amazing thing I've ever experienced in my life. You know, my life has completely changed. So, you know, there was something about negotiating some of those extremes, if you like, and trying to unpick the analysis, I suppose, which could have happened in all kinds of different ways, but I was conscious of funders. The analysis tried to unpick, if you like, some of the kind of commonalities between what people were saying, rather than push them. I mean, I'll just sort of say just a moment there, because I did think about funders when in the writing up phase, and did try and kind of make sure that I hit the right button, so that, because I'm, you know, so that Alice could use the report.
And I mean, you did do a survey, didn't you, after As You Like It, which allowed you to sort of well, it allowed you to put some sort of quantitative measures alongside the kind of the themes that you drew out from the conversations.
That's right, and thank you for that, because I think what we did was kind of find the kind of core themes, and then kind of think, well, we need to know a little bit more about this, a little bit more quantitatively. So we used the themes that had emerged as a survey. And also, I think funders like graphs. You know, they like to see a few stats, and that was, you know, I'm the least statistical researcher I think I've ever met, but you know, I kind of I could draw a pie chart, you know.
I just noticed a lovely thing pop up in the chat saying acts of translation, which is kind of exactly what the charts were.
Thank you so much for that. It's brilliant.
Thanks, Ruth.
Good luck, Ruth. With it, Ruth.
So Delia asks a question that I might even be able to ask quickly and not muck up, which is, what was the time frame of the research?
Helen, we spoke towards the end of the year in 2017, and you kind of started in early 2018. So Helen and her team were in the room from sort of, I mean, we'd done a first few months of workshops, but you joined for the second phase of workshops, and then through the rehearsal process which took place. So that was kind of January through to August. And then we produced, or I say we, Helen produced a brilliant interim report, which we shared with the partners and internally in the following autumn. And then there was another phase of research sort of through the workshop, and less focused on the workshops in the second year, because in a sense that we felt that had already been really quite thoroughly covered and explored in the first period. But then through the rehearsal period and then research, we also did some research with the audience for As You Like It at Queen's Theatre Hornchurch. And then there is a very full report, which has ended up being hugely delayed through COVID and impacts on both of our organisations, but is going to come out quite soon. But that would originally have come out sort of, I suppose, a few months after As You Like It. And then Helen has been very generously sort of, there's a different research team that we're working with in Doncaster from the Centre for Cultural Value, because we're working with them on on a wider research project looking at our national partnership work. But Helen has very generously given a lot of time to that process. And what's exciting now is a sort of sense that we're starting to build a body of research and findings around, sorry, Helen, I know you don't like the findings word, around public acts, which we can kind of continue to build on. And so we might look at it through we're just starting to talk about, there's a plan for a new public acts production back at the National Theatre, and hopefully in 2023, subject to all sorts of things, including funding. But we're starting to talk about whether we might look at that through a slightly different lens. And no doubt I will be coming back to talk to Helen again about how, because I think, the great thing about this partnership is that Helen, it's a very overused phrase, but Helen is absolutely a critical friend, I think, to me and to my department and to this programme. Sorry, I've slightly gone off the point, but
that's very kind, Alice. But I think one of the interesting things about it is, and this relates to the kind of word findings. And there was a question, I think, from Julie. Hello, Julie, in the chat, which was about how did the partner organisations and the participants hear about the research. And in a sense, what I wanted to do was to think about the whole research experience as being a process that you never quite finished, if you see what I mean. Now, obviously there is a report, but also I think what is really important was to have events, to go back and talk to people. I was very open with people about what we were learning. It wasn't a secret, at each stage people would come and have a chat. Where are you up to with this? What are you doing? So we had a range of different events with leaders of the partners. I went back into each of the organizations and had a conversation with the people who've been part of it, so that it felt like an ongoing dialogue all the way through. And there's just apart from the film, we Alice's team have just putting together another little short film about the kind of research and about what we've learned as a result of the partnership. And it felt really important that all of this is kind of accessible to different audiences in different ways. So probably only the really dedicated will read beyond the first page of the report. It needs to be there, but it kind of just sits there. But actually having, if you like, the kind of conversations put out in film form, in events, in conversations, really seems to me to be kind of much more open way of thinking. So my allergic reaction to the word finding is not because I don't think we've got any, is because it just seems to me to be always an unfinished process that needs to be kind of part of an ongoing dialogue, and it's just a sort of staging post where we capture stuff and then move forward.
Fantastic. We've got a few minutes left and we've got heaps of questions. This always happens. But maybe Sandra Gattenhoff, if you want to unmute and ask your question, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Helen and Alice, for that lovely presentation. And just through the images, we got a real sense of the depth of the engagement with the participants, which was lovely. I'm really interested in what you said about, this push and pull from funders, about looking at whether you are benchmarking the project against funders' KPIs, which is always an issue, or whether you and Alice and other partners involved in this research were able to set your own markers for impact and success to track through the project, and where did that happen for you?
I think that's a really good question. I think Alice, I've got some thoughts, but I think Alice kind of needs to say.
In a sense, we were quite. The initial funding of the program didn't come with specific markers to it. I think the sort of success criteria we set were largely to do with partnership, I think, and sustainability. And so it was about a continued, there are certain things like sort of numbers at workshops, numbers putting themselves forward to be in the production, people staying, it was a very, very intense rehearsal period. people continuing with that process despite the fact that it kind of took over most of their summer. The kind of sustainability in terms of the partners, how they, as a result of, or sort of through the taking part in public acts, how they have then gone on to form partnerships with other arts organisations or embed arts practice or creative practices of a different sorts into their day-to-day work. But I think those broad principles were set very early in the programme. I'm not sure that we were necessarily terribly disciplined in describing them very specifically. Helen shaking her head and agreeing, which was, I think, partly linked to this sort of the sort of openness with which we were able to go into the process and framing it with the question of what happens when a theatre, 2 theatres and 8 community organisations come together with this goal of making a production and of mutual learning. I suspect as we go on, we will need to, as in kind of a tighter and more complex funding climate, we will need to be much more precise about our criteria. And in fact, in a funding application which we have recently put in, we've kind of set 3 areas of focus, and it's kind of sort of impact in terms of the experience of the participants, of the partnerships, and organizational change. So I suppose we evolved the sense of these are the 3 areas where we think that public acts is acting as a catalyst for change.
I think I am very conscious of the ways in which funding, the theatres need the funding to do this work, and part of the role when you undertake something like this is to make sure they get the information that they need in order to be able to capture that in future. But I do think that one of the roles that universities can have, and I haven't done it yet, is to bring funders together to really talk through what it is that they actually want. Because I kind of sometimes wonder whether there's a conspiracy of silence. I won't expect Alice to even comment on this, around everybody thinking that what they want is to kind of prove that this works in very particular ways. But actually what gets funders excited is the kind of listening, going to see the production. For example, one of the funders whom I do know quite well, one of a funders who do know quite well, was intensely emotional about seeing public acts work, and that seems to me to be actually much more likely to capture people's hearts and minds than a report that says, well, 98% said that this was life-changing in every single way. That's useful, but I sometimes wonder if there's a sort of conspiracy that says, well, this is what everybody thinks that funders need, and then when you talk to funders, they say, yeah, but we need to justify that to our trustees. So I think as a sort of more neutral body outside this, not looking for money from those same funders, this might be an international conversation at some stages. What is it that actually funders really want? What is it that really enables them to fund a project? Is it that kind of data, or is it something else? And I think there's probably a piece of work to be done about that at some stage, which can't happen with those institutions that want to be funded by them. So that might be a role for a university, in a sense, is to inhabit that third space.
I think I find they need both, and that actually what the value of being able to share kind of stories, and what Helen's report does is it puts stories of individuals against data which shows how that is not specific to one individual, but something which is kind of general across the the company of participants, and they sort of mutually reinforce each other.
I think that's right. I think there's also something about quality, because you can write a really good report that says, oh yes, all these people said this and they all turned up at that, but it can still be quite a dull piece of work. If we have this as academics, people can write brilliantly theorized journal articles about some very dull drama. And I think there's something there about kind of opening up what quality means in this space as well, which does, mean something very deep to funders. They want to be associated with something that is and looks good.
I think the point you made earlier, Helen, about the joy and the affect. It's not just researchers or educators or artists who want to see that. I think it's actually people who are putting their money towards this stuff as well. And I think that's a kind of a really nice moment to end on. Sadly, we didn't get to all the questions, but we never would. Of course, I'd suggest that we all go off and have a lager in Soho, perhaps. But unfortunately, at the moment,
here.
It's only 10:30 in the morning. There is a
It's a
story
little
behind
early
that,
for
Alice,
lager.
which I will tell you one day.
but
Me taking Michael to a pub with lots of prostitutes in it. But let's not go there.
No, let's not. But
Thank you, everyone.
yeah, but thanks very much to both of you for putting a partnership really clearly, and also the benefits of it that have really started to flow through the whole organisation, and also some really interesting provocations for us to think of things to do in the future. So it's fantastic. I mean, I never thought we'd be disappointed, but and the other thing that I loved about your discussion is the hope. I mean, we're sitting in Australia in amidst pandemic, and you're talking about what might happen after a pandemic, and that's kind of hopeful for us. No one's talking like that in Sydney at the moment, so it's lovely to hear that. So thanks so much to both of you for your time and your thoughtfulness. This will be up on the YouTube channel, so tell your friends and your enemies, and get everyone to listen to what Alice and Helen have got to do. But thanks very much, everyone. Have a great morning, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Michael.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Bye.
And Robin. Bye-bye.
Bye.